Now the diagrams you're going to see, like this PHP architecture, are typical. And you saw the diagram from before where I showed you all the different diagrams of all the different setups that are out there. And to be honest with you, this is very unique to your organization, your setup. You know, it all depends. So sometimes when we have very large PHP architectures, we can't just have one Apache web server. We have to have multiples. We can't just have one database. We have to have multiples. But notice here how these parts interact. So on the client side, they get HTML and JavaScript that's served from the web server. And underneath of that is the PHP and the CGI connected back to the database. Cold Fusion. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, Dean, Cold Fusion? I mean, nobody's using that anymore. Well, I have a friend of mine who is an expert in Lotus Notes programming. He is also an expert, nobody knows about Lotus Notes anymore, he's also an expert at programming OS/2 Warp servers. You say, Dean, nobody does that anymore. Every year, my friend Bruce doubles his price for services on those particular items because there are fewer and fewer customers, and those customers need him more and more. So if you're an expert in Cold Fusion, don't throw that away. Don't take that off your resume. Put it on there and say, I'm an expert, and then also do some penetration testing around that. That will get you a rarity that you have that you can offer to the client that you can actually charge for if you're a penetration tester. Okay, Cold Fusion. The core technologies is the tagged-based structure. It's an embedded scripting language. It sits around JavaScript and Java. The databases are a variety of databases and a variety of platforms. If you look at the Cold Fusion architecture, it looks almost exactly the same. Here, let's switch back to PHP. Instead of PHP CGI, the Cold Fusion server, when it talks to the databases, requires that you either have an ODBC or a JDBC native communication between them. That's the only thing that's different. Everything else fits the same. It's going to spit out HTML, Java, and JavaScript. Java servlets. The core technology is Java, HTML, and JavaScript underneath. Again, all the different databases, all the different platforms that are out there. Here what we do is we put the Java servlet inside of the web server itself, and we usually do a servlet cache. In other words, we pre-process and pre-program this so that we can hand them out a little bit quicker. It's on the front side of things. The database is still behind it. HTML and JavaScript is what they see for the end user. Okay, so now what is JSP? Well, it's a combination of HTML, JavaScript, and the Java tags themselves. What this allows you to do is to work with Java beans. And so look up Java beans outside of this. Java tags are also controlling the Java runtime environment. The JRE, or the jar sometimes is what they call it. Okay, now we want to switch here and talk about where you can get information on all of these platforms so that you can do your vulnerability research. You go to Common Vulnerabilities and Exploits, one of two places. You can go to MITRE, CVEs, and look up the National Vulnerability Database. That's a US-based National Vulnerability Database. Or you can go to the Open Source Vulnerability Database, osvdb.org. I like OSVDB for one reason, because of that DB on the end. Not because it stands for Dean Bushmiller, but because it stands for database. That's what I like. Why? Because on my side of things, I want to have databases of, okay, what are these assets that my client wants me to test against? I collect up all that information and I say I know all the OSs, I type in all the information, I collect all that information from Nessus or Nmap, Metasploit to find out this is the software and the hardware and the programming that they have. And then what I do is I query the OSVDB and I say, what vulnerabilities do you know about for these particular assets right here? And you can't query it directly. What you have to do is you have to pull a copy down to yourself and then use that query locally on yours. But that makes it really elegant. I now have a list of all the vulnerabilities of the host that I'm testing against. When I need to refresh this data, I just take my database and I say go back up to OSVDB because it's a database and pull a diff. pull that down. Pull the new copy down and compare it here. The other nice thing about OSVDB is it also respects all of the other security vulnerability databases that are out there, including the CVE. Now, MITRE's is not a database, but people have a lot more respect for it because it's a larger database, or it's got a little bit more political cachet to it. And personally, I think OSVDB, I don't care which one you use, but use something that allows you to catalog all of the flaws that are out there. Let's talk about the list of flaws. If you go into OSVDB right now, if you stopped and you went in and you typed in the search dialog box, the blind search dialog box, and you typed in PHP, you're going to get this huge list. It's an amazing list of how many vulnerabilities that are out there. If you type in IIS, you're going to get a list. Remember, you got to narrow that by 7 versus 8. For each one of these things that we're talking about in hacking web servers, you can find out about a lot of the vulnerabilities out there and how you can prey upon those vulnerabilities. It's not going to give you an actual exploit. It's going to tell you that there is an exploit, it is in the wild, it has been confirmed. Remember, some of your clients out there are just going to say, well, what are my vulnerabilities here? I don't want you to do them. I want you to tell me what they are, and you're not doing a penetration test at that point. You're doing a vulnerability analysis. One of the other pieces inside of OSVDB and inside Common Vulnerability Scoring System, all of these databases use this scoring system. Now, you'll notice that there are 3 categories here, and it comes up to a sum total number. For this particular fault, it doesn't matter what it is, you've got it laid out in 6 places. How do we get to it? The access vector. Complexity, how hard is it to do this? Authentication, what kind of authentication is required? And then on the other side, the security information. Is it a breach of confidentiality, a breach of integrity, or a breach of availability? You sum total all this up, and you get your base score for the threatness of this kind of thing. So we total all that stuff up. This is kind of like a security-o-meter for each one of your vulnerabilities that are out there, and you'd have to catalog this for all of the different possible pieces of software that you have on that system. That doesn't mean that it's truly vulnerable, but this gives you an idea and a focus of where you're going to start to attack.